It is said that the oldest truths do not arrive with thunder. They arrive as a hush, like the first breath of tide pulling away from shore, like candlelight steadying itself inside a windless chamber. Where the story began was not a battlefield, not a throne room, not a place of cheering. It began near a listening sea, in forgotten corners of the earth, where memory fades into salt and sky. There stood a sanctuary of pale stone, white as bone in moonlight, smooth as a shell worn down by patience. The temple faced the water as though it had been built to hear what the sea could never stop saying. Its columns rose with quiet restraint, carved with spirals that seemed to turn inward, toward hidden chambers, toward sacred silence, toward the soft heart of devotion. Whispers tell us that, at dusk, the air there tasted of oil and incense, of warmed limestone, of brine carried in on the breeze. And when the lamps were lit, the temple did not glow like a festival. It glowed like a vow. Beneath the silence, hands moved with careful purpose. A small flame leaned toward a wick. Oil was poured in a thin. It is said that some rooms do not echo. They absorb. They take your voice, your breath, the small sounds of being human, and they hold them inside bronze and stone, until you are unsure whether you spoke at all. In forgotten corners of the earth, there is such a chamber, lined with bright bronze, polished until it resembles still water caught in metal. Mirrors that do not flatter, mirrors that do not soften. They only reflect coldly, faithfully, without mercy. We enter as if entering a ritual. The air is cool. The floor is smooth. Dust rests in the seams of marble like quiet ash. And in the center, resting on a block of stone, is a helmet. It is ancient, heavy, and calm. No blood, no battle, only the weight of authority made visible. Marked by the moon, the bronze shines with a pale, distant light, like starlight trapped in a shield. And as we stand in the chamber, a question rises like mist from the floor, slow and unavoidable. Is divine justice always justice, or sometimes only order? Athena is near, not as thunder, not as spectacle, as presence. Cool, disciplined, distant as a star that does not move closer even when you beg it to. In myth, she is wisdom, strategy, law, the steady architecture of the city, the measure hand that holds the spear upright, not in fury, but in control. And yet, beneath the silence, control can feel like coldness. The narrative focus rests on Athena as both protector and institution, an embodiment of sacred law. For gods in old stories were not only persons with tempers, they were systems. They were the invisible rules the world lived under. To honor them was to accept the shape of the world as it was carved. A temple, after all, is a gate to the divine, yes, but also a gate to judgment. We move through quiet symbols, as if walking through a dream that refuses to hurry. An owl's shadow passes along a column, silent, watchful, the soft shape of wisdom that sees without speaking. A spear stands upright in the corner, still as a vow. A thin ribbon of smoke rises from incense and disappears into the high air, as though even prayer becomes unsure of its destination. Some believe there was a moment when such prayers went unanswered, not because the gods could not hear, but because hearing is not the same as bending. And so the contradiction opens, slow as a door in a cold corridor. If holiness is meant to shelter, what does it mean when holiness answers with a curse? Where memory fades, the story of Medusa arrives like a shadow at the edge of torchlight. We do not speak it with sharp edges. We do not turn it into spectacle. We simply acknowledge that something happened within sacred walls, or near them, and afterward, a transformation was given as an answer. It is said that Athena punished Medusa. But what does punishment mean when spoken by an immortal? Some tellings frame Athena as wrath, offended by defilement, protecting the sanctity of her temple by reshaping the one within it. In that version, the goddess stands as a judge whose verdict is carved into flesh. The curse becomes a sentence, irreversible, public, and terrifying. Yet other whispers, quieter and harder to hold, suggest a different interpretation. A colder mercy, not kindness, but protection, made severe. Some believe that to make Medusa untouchable was to remove her from harm forever, to turn her gaze into a boundary no one could cross, to give her serpents as living guardians, coiled warnings that speak without words, a ward against further violation, a shield made of sorrow. The chapter holds both possibilities, like two stones in the palm, letting the listener feel their weight. One stone is hard and sharp, divine order enforced through pain. The other is heavy and cold, protection given too late, shaped in a way that isolates as much as it saves. And beneath the silence, the mirrors watch us consider these stones. In the sacred politics of myth, gods are moral architecture. They steady the world's rules the way columns steady a roof. Mortals become offerings placed into the story so that the structure does not collapse. A person's fate becomes a lesson. A transformation becomes proof that the system holds. It is said that ancient societies used these tales to draw boundaries around sanctity, around bodies, around blame, to warn, to instruct, to keep the collective world intact. But what is intactness, if it requires someone to be broken? In the bronze mirrors, the room reflects not only the helmet, the spear, the owl shadow. It reflects the listener, too, softly, ghost-like. Your own face becomes part of the chamber's quiet inquiry. Beneath the silence, you begin to understand why Athena's presence is so unsettling in this telling. She is not chaos. She is not wild cruelty. She is the calm certainty of law. And law, even when sacred, does not always comfort the one who has been hurt. Some believe that this is why Athena feels distant as a star. Stars do not bend toward single lives. They hold their place. They illuminate, but they do not embrace. So we stand in the chamber and imagine a moment of decision. The goddess, wisdom crowned with bronze. The temple, stone and vow. The mortal, small, human, trembling with whatever truth the story refuses to preserve. A prayer rises. Does it land? The owl's shadow passes again, soft as breath. The spear remains still. The helmet does not move. And the mirrors continue to reflect, without flattery, without mercy. In closing, the chamber grows dimmer, as if the bronze itself is sinking into moonlight. The question remains, suspended like smoke that refuses to vanish. Was the curse a sentence, or a shield made of sorrow? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps divine justice is not the same as human justice. Perhaps it is simply order, cold, enduring, and untroubled by tears. Or perhaps, in some hidden corner of the myth, there was an attempt at protection, misguided, late, severe, because even gods, in these old stories, do not always know how to heal what has been violated. The final reflection is a soft mirror held up to the listener. We do not end with certainty. We end with moonlit unresolvedness, like standing at the edge of a still pool and seeing your reflection tremble. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps this one was never meant to be answered, only carried, quietly, into sleep. It is said that some crowns are not placed gently. They arrive as consequence. They settle on the head like weather, unasked for, unavoidable, woven from the world's decision rather than one's desire. In forgotten corners of the earth, beneath a sky washed with dusk blue and thin starlight, this chapter opens with a close, quiet image. A single serpent, coiled like a living question. Its scales catch the faint light the way wet stone catches moonlight, softly, without glitter. There is no hiss, no sudden strike, only the slow rise and fall of breath, as if the serpent is listening to something deeper than sound. Marked by the moon, the air feels still enough to hold secrets, and the opening question comes gently, like mist touching skin. What if the monstrous is only a language for survival? Beneath the silence, we turn toward the transformation, not as spectacle, but as artifact. Something shaped by myth and memory. Something passed down through fearful voices until it hardened into a single image. Serpents for hair, a gaze that petrifies, a name spoken like warning. But the temple lamps have already dimmed behind us. The doors have already closed. And now we stand in the quiet space where the curse becomes form. The narrative focus is the metamorphosis itself, serpents as crown, gaze as boundary, stone as consequence. Some believe her hair was once braided with care, each strand gathered as if the world could be held together by patience. In older scenes, before the story tightened into fear, hair is intimate, human, warm. It carries scent of oil, smoke, sea wind. It catches dust and sunlight. And then the symbols shift. Whispers tell us that when fear speaks louder than understanding, it changes the meaning of things. It takes what is sacred and recasts it as threat. It takes what is protective and calls it monstrous. So hair becomes veil, not cloth, but living guardians. Serpents, not writhing in frenzy, but coiled and watchful, keepers of a threshold no one is meant to cross again. They crown her not with gold, but with a moving boundary, a warning made alive. And her eyes, once human, once capable of looking with sorrow and love and exhaustion, become gates. Gates no one dares to approach. It is said that her gaze turns breath into stone, a simple phrase, often repeated, polished until it shines with terror. Yet beneath the silence, we can feel another interpretation gathering like tide. Perhaps the gaze is not cruelty. Perhaps it is distance. Perhaps it is the final form of no. Deep exploration moves through older, quieter layers of Mediterranean memory, where serpents are not only feared, they are sacred. Some believe the serpent was an ancient companion of earth and healing. In temples of old, serpents appeared beside gods of medicine, coiled as symbols of renewal, because they shed their skins, because they returned from hidden places, because they seemed to carry the wisdom of underground chambers. In sacred stories, serpents are threshold keepers. They guard doorways between worlds. They linger near tombs and springs. They remind the living that the earth is not dead beneath their feet, only silent. So the contradiction appears soft, but undeniable. How can a sacred symbol become horror? Whispers tell us it happens when the symbol is attached to the wrong body, when power decides that a woman's protection is dangerous, when boundaries are treated as insult, when survival looks like rebellion to those who expected obedience. And so Medusa's crown is rewritten. The serpent, once coiled wisdom, becomes accusation. The threshold keeper becomes monster. The protective gaze becomes curse. Where memory fades, the world forgets the original language of symbols. It only remembers how to be afraid. We drift through vivid, meditative images, slow as incense rising. Moonlit cliffs where wind moves through ruined columns, carrying salt and dust. A broken statue half buried in sand, its face worn smooth, its mouth unable to speak the truth it once held. A temple corridor where torchlight flickers and then steadies, as if even flame is cautious. The soft scrape of sand against stone, one of the gentlest sounds in the world, and yet it feels like time itself erasing footprints. Some believe there were visitors who came seeking her. Heroes, yes, but also wanderers, seekers, those drawn to forbidden knowledge. In many myths, the monster lives at the edge of the map, where certainty ends, and people go there not only to destroy, but to test themselves against the unknown. And still, beneath the silence, the question remains, was she hunting them? Or were they crossing a boundary that should have been respected? The transformation in this telling is not framed as spectacle. It is framed as metamorphosis, an existence shaped by others' choices, a life altered into symbol so that the world could keep its rules intact. It is said that after the change, she lived at the margin, between sea and ruin, between myth and human memory, the serpent crown listening with her, the gaze holding its boundary, the air around her thick with the warning people insisted upon. And yet there is another possibility, quiet as dust and torchlight. Perhaps she did not become a monster. Perhaps she became a boundary the world refused to respect until it could not cross it at all. Stone, then, is not just punishment. Stone is consequence. Stone is what happens when a world insists on taking what it has no right to take. Stone is the final form of distance, cold, silent, irreversible. In closing, the serpent in the opening image remains coiled, breathing slowly. The starlight remains gentle on its scales. The night remains calm. The chapter settles into stillness. No verdict. No loud moral. Only sacred uncertainty, held like a quiet bowl in the hands of sleep. Perhaps the crown was never meant to terrify. Perhaps it was meant to protect. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps somewhere beneath the silence, where memory fades and the sea keeps breathing, Medusa's transformation still waits to be understood, not as monstrosity, but as survival spoken in the oldest language of the earth. It is said that the world has edges, not only the edges of maps, where the ink fades into blank parchment, but the edges of belonging, places where a name becomes inconvenient, where a life becomes difficult to hold within the rules of a city. And so we begin with a shoreline far from all voices, in forgotten corners of the earth, where memory fades into fog and salt. The sea speaks in a language older than names. The air tastes of distance. Wind moves over stone with the patience of time, and the waves arrive without urgency, folding and unfolding like breath. Marked by the moon, the shore glimmers faintly, wet rock, pale sand, the dull green of seaweed clinging to broken steps. Far behind, the land rises into ruins, crumbled columns, collapsed arches, fragments of marble half buried in drifted sand, as if a temple once stood here and then quietly forgot why. Somewhere beyond the veil of mist, an exile lives, not in a palace, not in a city, not beneath the safety of familiar walls, among broken columns and forgotten offerings. The opening question arrives with the tide, as soft as the sea's own hush. What does the world do with those it cannot forgive or cannot control? Beneath the silence, we descend, not with footsteps loud enough to echo, but with the slow, inward movement of attention. A long descent to the Gorgon's shore is not only a journey across water, it is a journey away from certainty, away from clean stories, away from the bright, crowded places where myths are told loudly and believed without question. The narrative focus is Medusa's dwelling as a place of banishment and mystery. The outline does not paint it as a lair. It paints it as refuge, quiet, reluctant, shaped by loneliness. We move through chambers where footsteps are rare, a roofless hall where rain has worn channels and stone like thin rivers, a corridor where wind slides through broken pillars and makes a sound like distant chanting. Only it is not human, not sacred, just air moving through emptiness. A doorway whose lintel is etched with spirals and star-marked lines, now softened by salt and time, as if even the carvings have learned to speak more gently. Whispers tell us that exile changes the shape of a place. A room becomes a shelter because it must. A broken wall becomes a boundary because it is all that remains. A silence becomes company because no other voice dares to linger. In the corners there are offerings left long ago, shells arranged in careful circles, small bronze tokens dulled by sea air, fragments of pottery with faded paint. They feel less like gifts and more like evidence, proof that someone once came here with intention, perhaps with reverence, perhaps with fear. And then we see them. Statues, not carved in neat rows like temple art, but scattered, standing in strange postures along the path, half hidden behind columns, half sunk in sand. Some face the sea, some face the ruin, some hold their hands as if mid-prayer, mid-plea, mid-question. The stone figures stand like interrupted prayers. Beneath the silence, the contradiction begins to breathe. Are these trophies of cruelty? Or are they the remains of visitors, wanderers who came seeking forbidden knowledge, drawn to the edge of the known world? It is said, in the most common version, that Medusa's gaze turns all who look upon her into stone. The story is often told as warning. Approach the monster, and you will be punished. But myths, like shores, have hidden currents. Some believe these statues are not trophies at all. They are traces of pilgrimage disguised as horror, for there have always been those who walk toward the forbidden, not to destroy it, but to understand it, to stand at the threshold of fear and ask what it is made of. In the ancient Mediterranean, edges were sacred, islands were mysterious, caves and cliffs were believed to be gates where the world thinned, where gods and spirits might pass close enough to be felt. So perhaps this shore was not only a prison. Perhaps it was a shrine no one dared to name. Whispers tell us that solitude can become a temple without priests, a sanctuary without hymns. a sacred hall made only of wind, salt, and the steady breathing of waves. And in this temple of exile, Medusa exists as presence more than spectacle. We do not need to see her clearly. We do not need to describe her with sharp detail. She is the quiet gravity in the ruins, the reason the offerings remain, the reason the footprints stop at certain thresholds, the reason the air feels watchful without being hostile. Beneath the silence, we feel the spiritual texture of exile, how it can be both wound and protection. To be sent away is to be erased from the living world, yet to be sent away is also to be beyond reach. No hands can claim you here. No laws can bind you here. No temple walls can close around you again. The sea becomes the only witness, and the sea does not accuse. It only repeats its ancient language again and again, until even sorrow begins to sound like prayer. We drift deeper into the ruins. A courtyard where weeds grow between marble cracks, misty green against pale stone. A broken statue base that once held a goddess, now empty. Its absence like a mouth that will not speak. A half-collapsed archway framing the ocean beyond, so that every glance outward becomes a reminder. There's no returning to the bright world, only the endless horizon, marked by the moon. The ruins seem gentler. The harsh edges blur. The sea fog wraps the columns like veils. Dust and salt drift together in the air. And the statues, though still human shapes, begin to feel less like punishment and more like tragedy frozen in place. Some believe they came here seeking proof. Some came seeking power. Some came seeking a story they could take back to the city and sell as certainty. And perhaps, in the end, they found what the shore always offers, consequence for crossing a boundary without understanding it. Yet the chapter does not ask us to condemn them. It asks us to sit with the mystery, to consider that fear often hides fascination. That monster is sometimes a word used when a society cannot admit it has created its own exile. The final reflection settles like moonlight on wet stone. We do not end with Medusa roaring, or hunting, or triumphing. We end with her as a presence felt rather than seen, breathing, enduring, listening to the sea. Somewhere among the broken columns, a lamp might still burn faintly in imagination, sheltered from wind. Somewhere in the mist, a figure might sit in stillness, crowned by the weight of solitude rather than rage. And the sea keeps speaking, quietly, patiently, as if it is saying, "She is here, and she has always been here, not as a beast, but as a boundary." The sacred uncertainty left behind is soft and lingering, like fog that refuses to lift. Perhaps the monster was never hunting. Perhaps she was only trying to live where no one could take anything from her again. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps, at the edge of sleep, we finally are. It is said that heroes are made in the dark, not in the bright noon of certainty, but in the hour when a lamp burns low and the mind drifts toward sleep, when the world feels soft at the edges and decisions can be mistaken for destiny. In forgotten corners of the earth, this chapter begins with a young man standing at the edge of sleep. A shore is behind him. A path of stone is before him. Above, the sky is star-marked, scattered with quiet lights that do not explain themselves. The air tastes of salt and distance, and the night holds its breath as if listening. In his hands are gifts that are not truly his. Polished bronze that catches moonlight like still water. Winged sandals, light as rumor, heavy as obligation. A blade that gleams without warmth, as if it has never learned the comfort of being human. Beneath the silence, the opening question arrives soft as prayer. When a deed is called heroic, who pays for its shine? Whispers tell us that Perseus did not begin as a conqueror. He began as a son and a pawn, caught in the slow machinery of promises made by kings, by oracles, by gods whose voices did not tremble when they spoke. In some tellings, a ruler's hunger for certainty becomes the spark. A king demands proof, demands a trophy, demands the impossible, Medusa's head, because power is rarely satisfied by ordinary obedience. So the quest is formed, not purely from courage, but from pressure. A prophecy presses like a hand on the shoulder. A vow tightens like a thread around the wrist. And the hero steps forward, carrying borrowed light. The narrative focus is the journey itself, Perseus moving through night, guided by divine instruction and human ambition. The pace remains meditative, like a slow crossing over dark water. We imagine him traveling beneath starlight, where the sea is a black mirror, where each wave is a quiet breath rising and falling. Islands pass like dark thoughts. Distant cliffs appear and vanish. The horizon feels endless, as if the world is trying to keep its secrets. Marked by the moon, Perseus becomes less a person and more a silhouette, an outline moving through myth. Yet beneath the silence, we sense his human weight, the doubt that does not speak aloud, the fatigue of being used by stories larger than oneself. It is said that the gods give him tools, not comfort. Tools, a mirrored shield, polished bronze that reflects rather than reveals, a helm that hides the wearer like shadow, a blade that cuts cleanly, without asking permission of the heart. These are not gifts of tenderness. They are instruments of outcome. And so Perseus walks with the strange intimacy of borrowed power, his success dependent on objects that carry divine intent, yet remain cold, immortal hands. Deep exploration reveals the moral chamber beneath the quest. Perseus does not seek Medusa for personal grief alone. He is entangled in vows, power, and the hunger of kings. He is caught in the old pattern of hero myths, where society sanctifies violence by placing it inside a necessary story. Whispers tell us this is how violence becomes clean. Give it a prophecy. Give it a monster. Give a shining name. And suddenly, what would be murder in daylight is called destiny at night. In ancient worlds, hero tales were more than entertainment. They were instruction. They taught people what courage looked like. They taught them whom to fear. They taught them that order is restored when the dangerous figure is removed. And yet the chapter invites the listener to notice something quiet and unsettling. Perseus cannot look directly at Medusa. He must avert his eyes. He must see her only through reflection. The mirrored shield becomes more than strategy. It becomes symbol. Truth, it suggests, is too sharp to face without a veil. Or perhaps it suggests that the hero cannot bear the full human sight of what he is about to do. Beneath the silence, we feel the paradox tighten like a knot. If the deed is righteous, why must it be done without looking? Some believe the mirrored shield is a mercy, an avoidance of her gaze, yes, but also an avoidance of her face, a way to keep the act clean of empathy, a way to reduce a person into an image, a target, an object at the end of a quest. We drift through quiet images of the journey, a sacred hall where a bronze bowl holds starlight on its surface, a shoreline where salt gathers and spirals along stone, a cliff path where wind moves like whisper and the world smells of cold iron and sea spray. Perseus moves through them all like someone walking inside a dream he did not choose. And always the borrowed light remains, the bronze gleam of the shield, the faint gleam of the blade, the moon's pale guidance above. It is said that heroes are often praised for what they carry home. But the sea does not praise. The sea only remembers. It remembers the crossing, the breath held in the dark, the quiet inevitability of feet approaching a shore where exile lives among ruins. In final reflection, the hero's steps become quieter. The world narrows to a hush, a distant archway framed in fog, a ruined corridor where torchlight trembles, a threshold where statues stand like interrupted prayers. And the mirrored shield catches the faintest suggestion of movement in the mist, an outline crowned by serpents, or perhaps only by shadow. We end just before the act. No blade falls. No shout rises. The moment is held in suspended silence, like a candle flame sheltered under a palm. And the uncertainty left behind is sacred and unsettling. If a hero must avert his eyes, what does that say about what he is truly doing? Perhaps it was never meant to feel simple. Perhaps the borrowed light was not only a tool, but a warning, reminding us that some deeds shine only because we refuse to see them directly. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, we remain at the edge of that moment, breathing softly in the dark, watching reflection where truth might be too bright to face. It is said that some powers begin as silence, not as lightning, not as fury, as a hush that gathers slowly in the lungs, until even breathing feels like a choice. In forgotten corners of the earth, we open in near darkness. The air is cool and heavy, thick with careful breath. A single flame trembles somewhere beyond sight, and only the faint glimmer of bronze catches its candlelight, soft as starlight trapped in metal. Beneath the silence, a question forms without sound. Is the gaze a weapon, or a boundary the world forced into being? The corridor is narrow. The stone is old. The ceiling is carved with spirals that disappear into shadow, as if the temple itself is thinking inward thoughts. Dust drifts through the air like pale ash, and the scent of salt lingers, oceanic, distant, patient. Marked by the moon, the darkness feels less like emptiness and more like a veil. Something is here, unseen, listening. And then we notice the stillness. Not the ordinary stillness of an abandoned place, but a stillness that feels interrupted, like a sentence cut short mid-breath. Statues, not placed like art, not arranged with ceremony, but scattered, standing in odd angles, half-turned as if they were walking, reaching, speaking. Hands raised mid-plea. Faces caught between curiosity and regret. A mouth open as if it had just begun to say a name. The narrative focus rests on the famous power itself, treated as mystery rather than spectacle. We do not treat these figures as horror props. We treat them as frozen human moments, captured not in cruelty, but in time. There is an eerie tenderness to them. Stone is memory made permanent, dust settling like soft snowfall on unmoving shoulders. A thin layer of sand gathered at their feet, as if time has been trying to bury what happened here, not to hide it, but to soften it. Whispers tell us that myths often exaggerate violence because it keeps listeners awake. But in this telling, the power is not loud. It is quiet. It is the kind of power that does not need to shout because it is not hunting. It is simply there. A boundary. And boundaries, when crossed, create consequences. Beneath the silence, we drift deeper into the chamber behind the legend. The bronze glimmer widens, perhaps a shield leaning against stone, perhaps a broken lampstand, perhaps something left behind by a hand that never returned. Candlelight pools in shallow circles and then dies into shadow. The air feels aware, not hostile aware. Some believe this is what true witnessing feels like. Not judgment, not attack, but a presence that sees without flinching. Deep exploration turns the gaze into symbol. In mythic logic, to be seen is to be judged. To be named is to be shaped. And Medusa has been named again and again, until her name hardened into warning. But what was she beneath the name? A woman, an exile, a figure pressed to the edge of the world until she became the edge. Eyes in ancient cultures were never only eyes. They were gates, windows, mirrors. They carried blessing and curse. The evil eye was feared. The divine eye was revered. To be looked upon by a god could mean revelation or ruin. And to be truly witnessed by another human, that was its own kind of fear. Because to be seen is to be known, and to be known is to be vulnerable. So the gaze becomes a sacred contradiction. Medusa's gaze punishes the onlooker. But did she choose that power? Or did it arrive as a consequence of others' choices, like a lock placed on a door after the harm has already been done? Beneath the silence, we can imagine how such a power might form. Not from malice, but from necessity. Not from cruelty, but from exhaustion. A final protection shaped into myth. Some believe the gaze was a curse, punishment given from above, meant to mark her as other, meant to isolate her from all touch. Others believe it became a shield, an awful mercy, making her untouchable in a world that would not leave her untouched. In either case, the result is the same, distance. A life lived behind a veil no one can lift. The pacing remains slow, meditative, filled with moonlit imagery. Wind moves through grass beyond the ruins, making a sound like whispered cloth. A distant owl calls once, then falls silent, as if even it does not wish to linger. The sea's hush presses against the far cliffs, steady and unjudging, repeating its ancient language. And among the statues, the dust keeps settling, softly, patiently, as if time is trying to turn fear into sleep. We linger on a figure whose hand is raised, palm outward, not in threat, but in a gesture that could have meant weight. Another statue leans forward, as if drawn by curiosity more than violence. A third is turned away, caught in the moment between courage and regret. These are not trophies. They are moments, and moments in stone are heavy with unanswered questions. Whispers tell us that people came here for many reasons. Some were sent by kings. Some were guided by prophecy. Some were drawn by the strange gravity of forbidden knowledge, because humans have always approached the edge of the map to see if the world truly ends there. But the myth, as it is often told, does not ask why they came. It only insists on what happened. And so we ask gently, in the hush of candlelight, if the gaze is a weapon, why does it feel so still? If it is a boundary, why did the world keep crossing it? The final reflection arrives like moonlight touching a quiet floor. Perhaps the gaze was not meant to destroy, but to keep distance. Perhaps it was the last language left to someone whose softer words were ignored. A boundary so absolute that it turned approach into consequence. Stone, then, is not only punishment. Stone is permanence. Stone is the final form of no. And sometimes the world calls a boundary monstrous when it can no longer cross it. The chapter closes in sacred uncertainty. The candlelight dims. The bronze glimmer fades. The statues remain, carrying their frozen breaths into eternity. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps, at the edge of sleep, we can finally hear what the stillness has been saying all along. This was never about a monster. It was about distance. It was about the cost of being seen, and the quiet, aching truth that sometimes the strongest boundary is the one the world forces into being, then punishes for existing. It is said that a blade can end a life, but it cannot end a story. Long after the shoutless moment that myth insists upon, after the breath held, after the bronze flash, after the world pretends it was simple, we arrive in a quieter age. An age of aftermath. An age where the sea has already reclaimed footprints, where the ruins have begun to soften at their edges, where dust has returned to its slow, patient work. In forgotten corners of the earth, the chapter opens not on violence, but on echo, a name traveling through mouths that never knew her breath. Medusa, spoken in markets, whispered in temples, murmured beside hearth fires where children learned fear before they learned sleep. The sound of her becomes a shape that can be carried, traded, polished, until it no longer resembles the living person it once belonged to. Beneath the silence, the opening question forms, simple and haunting, like a bell heard through fog. What survives when the person is gone, but the story remains? We begin with a threshold, an old door of weathered wood bound with bronze bands. Above it, carved into stone, is a face, wide-eyed, strange, staring outward. A Gorgon face, not hidden away, but placed where all must pass beneath it. The carving is worn. Dust lies in the grooves. Salt has softened the sharpness of its lines. Marked by the moon, it looks less like terror and more like vigilance. The narrative focus is the echo, how Medusa becomes symbol, omen, talisman, warning, and shield. Her image begins its strange afterlife, traveling farther than she ever did. It appears in places that never saw her shore, painted on pottery, set into mosaics, pressed into metal, carried into cities that call themselves safe. Whispers tell us that the world did not let her rest. It carried her forward, not as memory, but as instrument. Here is the sacred irony. The world destroys her, then wears her face to ward off fear. In one generation, she is named a monster so the story can end neatly. In the next, her visage is nailed above the doorway as protection, as if the very thing they feared was also the very thing that could keep them from harm. We drift through time like dust through light. A temple wall, where an artisan sets tiny stones into a mosaic, oxidized bronze greens, clay reds, sandstone yellows, forming the Gorgon's face with careful hands. The eyes are made bright. The mouth is opened in a frozen expression. The work is meant to guard the sacred hall, to turn away misfortune, to break the gaze of envy before it enters. A shield in a soldier's armory, bronze polished, until it reflects torchlight, bearing the same face, Medusa's face, at its center. The soldier does not speak her story. He only trusts the symbol. He believes it will frighten the enemy, confuse the blade, keep death at a distance. A coin stamped with a grimacing visage, passed from palm to palm until the edges blur. The face becomes less a person than a charm, proof that fear can be turned into currency. Beneath the silence, we feel the contradiction deepen. If she was only a monster, why do people place her at their gates? If her gaze was only curse, why is her image used as blessing? Deep exploration moves through sacred irony, gently, without accusation. In ancient Mediterranean belief, images could hold power. Certain faces were placed at thresholds, apotropaic, meant to turn away evil. The Gorgon was one of the most enduring of these. Her stare was believed to repel harm, to guard what was precious, to hold the line between safety and intrusion. So the myth transforms into architecture. The story becomes a lock. Medusa's visage becomes a gate. And in this, the world admits something it rarely says aloud. What terrifies us also fascinates us. What we cannot control, we try to harness. What we destroy, we sometimes keep, because a part of us still believes it carried truth. Where memory fades, the echo continues. In the hush of a museum-like hall, if we imagine such a place in ancient terms, a treasury room, a sacred archive, the artifacts remain. A fragment of pottery with a single staring eye, a broken tile with a spiral curl that once formed part of her hair, a corroded bronze disc bearing the faint outline of a face. These fragments do not shout monster. They only endure. They ask us, quietly, to notice what happened after the ending. It is said that hero myths must close their doors firmly. They must declare victory. They must restore order. But the echo does not always obey the ending. The echo keeps traveling. It moves through generations, slipping into daily life, into prayer, into war, into protection rites and household thresholds. Medusa becomes less a being and more a function. A warning told to daughters, a shield carried by sons, a symbol used by those who never asked what it meant to the one whose face it was. And still beneath the silence, another possibility breathes. Perhaps the enduring power of her image is not proof of monstrosity, but proof of boundary. Proof that something in her story would not be erased completely. That even after she was silenced, the world still needed what she represented. A stare that stops intrusion. A presence that makes crossing the line costly. The tone remains gentle, as if we are listening to a room that still remembers footsteps. The kind of room where dust lies undisturbed in corners, where old light falls on old stone, where the air holds the faint scent of oil lamps long extinguished. In final reflection, the echo softens into a lullaby of unanswered questions. We return to starlight on ruins, to see mist drifting through broken columns, to a doorway where the Gorgon's face still watches, worn, quiet, unblinking. And we ask, without demanding an answer, what survives? Is it the fear? Is it the symbol? Is it the lesson society wanted to teach? Or is it, hidden beneath all of that, the faint outline of a person? Someone whose name was once spoken softly in a temple by the sea. Someone whose breath was real, whose life was not a metaphor until others made it one. Perhaps the truest story is not the one that shouts monster. Perhaps it is the one that asks, in the dark, who she was when no one was watching. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, we let the echo remain, quiet, reverent, unresolved, like dust drifting in a single beam of moonlight, refusing to settle completely. It is said that we end where sleep begins, not at the end of a sentence, but at the edge of language, where stories loosen their grip and return to breath, and the mind becomes a quiet shore the waves can finally reach. In forgotten corners of the earth, the opening image is small, almost nothing. A single strand of hair caught in moonlight. It drifts in the night air like a forgotten thread, moving with the gentlest wind. It is not a crown. It is not a serpent. It is not a warning carved into stone. It is simply human, marked by the moon. That strand glimmers once and then fades into shadow, as if the night itself is trying to remember what The story once was before it became loud, and the question that rises now is not for conquest, but for quiet. If we could speak to Medusa before any curse, what would we ask? And would we listen to the answer? Beneath the silence, the tale gathers itself like soft cloth. We feel the temple hush again, the oil poured into lamps, the incense lifting in slow spirals, the marble warmed by prayers that never wanted an audience. We remember the chamber of bronze, Athena's mirror that reflects without flattery, the helmet resting on stone like a law that cannot bend. We recall the long descent to the shore, where exile lives among broken columns and the sea speaks in an older language than names. We remember the hero's borrowed light, the mirrored shield that cannot look directly, the avoidance that becomes symbol, truth too sharp to face without reflection. We remember the statues, frozen human moments, dust settling on shoulders, stillness that feels tender rather than cruel. And now, instead of resolving these contradictions, we hold them, we honor them, because the oldest myths were never clean. They were woven from power and fear, devotion and forgetting. They were shaped by hands that wanted the world to behave, and by voices that needed the night to feel safe. Some believe myths are not only entertainment, they are architecture. They are walls built around a culture's anxieties, gates placed where desire might wander, lamps lit to guide a community through darkness, sometimes by illuminating truth, and sometimes by casting someone else into shadow. Where memory fades, myth becomes a tool. It teaches caution. It teaches obedience. It teaches who must be feared. It teaches who must carry blame, so the temple can remain pure, so the city can remain ordered, so the hero can remain good. And yet, beneath the silence, a quieter possibility remains, that beneath every monstrous mask is a person whose name was once spoken with tenderness, a person who had mornings and evenings, who listened to the sea, who felt the coolness of marble underfoot, who breathed incense into her lungs and believed, perhaps, that sanctuaries were meant to shelter. This is reconciliation with uncertainty, not the reminder that anything could be true, but the gentler understanding that stories were not always made to protect the one at their center. So we ask the question again, softly, as if speaking through veil. If we could meet her before the curse, what would we ask? Would we ask for the real version? Would we ask what happened inside the temple when the air changed? Would we ask what she felt when the door closed and the story turned? Or would we ask something smaller and truer, something no myth can easily carry? Did you feel safe here? Did you ever feel heard? Did anyone say your name with kindness when no one was watching? And would we listen to the answer if it did not fit the version most often told? Whispers tell us that listening is the rarest form of respect. To listen is to risk having your certainty undone. To listen is to allow the story to remain unfinished, to accept that the world is not always arranged into neat moral shapes. Perhaps that is why the myth became what it became, because ambiguity is harder to carry than fear. Yet in this gentle closing, we do not need fear to keep us awake. We are here to be guided toward rest. So we let the story dim. We return to stone, not only as punishment, but as endurance. Stone is what lasts when voices fade. It holds impressions of footsteps long after feet are gone. It keeps the shape of doors, of thresholds, of altars. It remembers that something happened, even if it does not keep the words. In the ruins by the sea, the stones still stand. They have outlasted the kings and their hungers. They have outlasted the scribes and their polished versions. They have outlasted the hero's bright moment and the crowd's approval. Stone does not take sides. Stone simply remains. Marked by the moon, the ocean continues its hush. The wind continues its slow work, moving dust through broken columns, turning sharp edges soft. The statues, whether trophies, warnings, or tragic visitors, gather a gentler layer of time, until even fear becomes quiet. And somewhere within that quiet, Medusa remains partly veiled, not because she must be hidden forever, but perhaps because she deserves rest from being looked at as a symbol. Perhaps the veil is not punishment now. Perhaps it is privacy. The final sacred uncertainty lingers, like a candle lowered, without being extinguished. We may never know the whole beginning. We may never recover the name beneath the name. But if we have listened closely enough, we might sense the shape of her humanity, still present, still breathing in the spaces between the loud versions. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in daylight. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, we let the story loosen its grip. We let it return to breath. We let the strand of hair drift, moonlit and weightless, like a thread released back into the night. Not solved, not conquered, simply held with reverence.